A gute Woche. Und Rebbe soll uns began the Farbrengen this afternoon that this is the Shabbos after Shavuos. In the Yontif of Shavuos, Rebbe continued, we find a special stress that the Rebbe explains in Shulchan Aruch at length regarding the obligation on Shavuos for lachem. In other words, to enjoy the Yontif in Gashmi is the enjoyment. The Alter Rebbe even explains in Shulchan Aruch that by doing so, we express how we are happy and satisfied with the fact that we got the Torah. Now, how does a person express his joy and his happiness? This is expressed when he does acts of happiness. Memela, the enjoying the festivity of the Yontif, of Shavuos, is more than all other Yom Tov. And the expression of the Gemara, it is Hakol Moedim, everybody agrees, the Ba'atzeres, that on Shavuos, Be'inon Lachem, we need the Lachem also. In other words, in the Gemara we find there two concepts. There's a concept of Lashem, and there's a concept of Lachem. Lashem is the Ruchniistic part of the Yontif, the spiritual part of the Yontif. Lachem is the Gashmiistic part of the Yontif. Memela, regarding the Yontif of Shavuos, it's especially stressed in halacha the fact that we have to enjoy the Yontif in the sense in the Gashmiistic enjoyment. Even though Rebbe says there are opinions that regarding every Yontif we should say Zman Simchaseinu, our Yontif of happiness. We in davening say it only regarding to Sukkot. However, there are such opinions in halacha, but this is not an accepted opinion. It's a day in Torah, but as far as halacha, we do not do so. As far as halacha, it comes Shavuos, we say Zman Matan Torah Seinu. But at the same time, the inyan and the importance of Gashmi is very much stressed on Shavuos. And here the Rebbe continued that there are mitzvahs which we are obligated to do. However, there are such mitzvahs which the obligation is only when we come into a certain situation. But l'ketchila, we don't have to go and search for the situation. The Rebbe spoke about it Shavuos as well. A very strong example the Rebbe brings from the mitzvah of ma'ako. Ma'ako means a gate. If a person owns a house, and he has a roof, and people are walking on that roof and it's a dangerous area, so it's the owner's obligation to make a fence or a gate around the roof so that nobody should fall and get hurt. When does a person have this mitzvah? This mitzvah he has only when he has a house, and his house has such type of an open roof, where this situation applies. There he has this mitzvah. But one who does not have the circumstances that bind him to this mitzvah doesn't have to go and search after fulfilling the mitzvah. Another example is the mitzvah of tzitzis. Regarding the mitzvah of tzitzis, originally, tzitzis is only for a person who has a garment with four corners. He's supposed to put on tzitzis. Otherwise, there is no obligation of putting on tzitzis. However, regarding tzitzis, the Rebbe immediately explained that the Gemara tells us that now it's different, and everyone is obligated to wear tzitzis. And here the Rebbe brought out tzitzis has something very general in it, as the pasuk itself tells us. By seeing tzitzis, this reminds us on all the mitzvahs. And there's something else which is unique in tzitzis, that here we have a mitzvah which surrounds the majority of a person's body. This is the halacha in tzitzis, that the talis katan is supposed to be in such a shear and such a size that it surrounds the majority of his body. So it's an outstanding thing. Same thing, Shavuos. Besides being the mitzvahs of Shavuos, there's the general idea in Shavuos, the general message in Shavuos. What is the general inyan in Shavuos? The general inyan in Shavuos is that Shavuos is the general commitment to Torah mitzvahs. The general relationship and tie to the Eibishter, which we have to the learning of his Torah and to fulfilling of his mitzvahs, all of this happened on Shavuos. All of this comes as a result of Shavuos. In other words, the Rebbe is trying to bring out the idea, just like Maika is a general inyan. When we come into the situation, we have the mitzvah. Tzitzis originally is also the same. Shavuos in this sense There's a similarity in the same idea in Shavuos when we come to the Yontif of Shavuos, besides the mitzvahs which we have, because in general Shavuos really doesn't have any special mitzvahs. There's no special mitzvahs regarding the Yontif. But on the other hand, there's a very special message which Shavuos gives, and that is the overall commitment from a Yid to the Rebishter. This is channeled through the Yontif of Shavuos. Now when we had Shavuos this week, and the Shabbos after Shavuos is Shabbos Parshas Naso. What is the inyan of Naso? Naso, besides the count, it also means to lift up, to elevate. So we can imagine what type of a special Shabbos this is, because here we're talking on an elevation which is coming after Shavuos. Especially what we know, Hasidus teaches us, how Shabbos elevates the entire week. This applies to all Shabbosim throughout the entire year. Now when we had such a special week, a week that had such a special Yontif, the Yontif of Shavuos, and now we are to Shabbos after, so this Shabbos is giving the spiritual uplifting to the entire week and as well to Shavuos, which is a Shabbos in general. This Shabbos a step further, because we are reading Shabbos Parshas Naso. Rabbi explained that Bamidbar is always read before Shavuos. Naso, there are years that Naso could be read before Shavuos, and there are years that Naso could be read after Shavuos. This year, Naso is read after Shavuos, but at the same time it's read after Shavuos and very close to Shavuos. Shavuos was Wednesday and Thursday, and all we have is one day, the day of Friday, which Friday in itself is a day of preparation for Shabbos. So we have, right away from Shavuos, we are going to Parshas Naso. In fact, the Gemara tells us, Misha tarach be'erev Shabbos, yechal b'Shabbos. The one who prepares on Erev Shabbos, he has what to eat on Shabbos. So in Gemara we find that there's a machlokes of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. If a person sees something nice on Sunday, whether he's obligated to save it already for Shabbos, Beis Shammai are under the opinion that right away, as of the beginning of the week, as soon as a person sees something nice, he should save it for Shabbos. He will find something yet nicer, then he could put this thing aside and save the yet nicer thing for Shabbos. But what we're trying to gather from the entire thing is that the preparation for this Shabbos was during this week. And this was such a special week, the week of Shavuos. So the Tarach Be'erev Shabbos was on Shavuos. And now we have the Yoichal B'Shabbos is on this Shabbos, Shabbos Parshas Naso, the Shabbos that elevates the entire week, and particularly the meaning of Naso, which means the particular elevation which comes on this week. Naso, to lift up. And here the Rebbe went further. In general, the whole inyan of Matan Torah, which this is the inyan of Shavuos. So we know that it's explained in Chassidus at length what the great accomplishment of Matan Torah was. Chassidus teaches us that Matan Torah introduced Kedusha, sanctity, into a hefza, into an object of mitzvah. In other words, today, when we fulfill a mitzvah, for example, tefillin, there is a Kedusha in the tefillin. In halacha, we know there are various categories. There's a category of tashmishe kedusha, davasha b'kedusha, things which we use for kedusha dika things, or the davasha b'kedusha itself, something which in itself is something holy. This is such a holiness, such a spiritual holiness is instilled in this gashmi is dika thing that the al pi halacha, this item, what do we do? If we just chose tefillin or any other similar things, a Sefer Torah or anything, it's a gashmiistic thing. And at the same time we say that there is getlachkeit, there is a lakus in this thing. When was this accomplished? This was accomplished by Matan Torah. Prior to Matan Torah, as Chassidus uses the expression based on a medrash, the world was divided, hashamayim shamayim lashem, va'oratz nasan livnei yodam. Spiritual ruchnius was something which was for heaven, and aretz, and the world was given, livnei yodam was given to people. However, the blend, the mixture of kedusha, of getlachkeit into this world, this is something which Matan Torah introduced. Prior to Matan Torah, this was not in existence. In fact, there's a famous mashal which is given in Chassidus that there were two countries which had a border, and people were prohibited from crossing the border. However, once the king came out and suggested we'll open the borders, and he will be the first one to cross the border. The same, Hashamayim shamayim lashem, va'aretz nasan livnei yodam. However, when it came to Matan Torah, Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. Hashem, which is Kedusha Ruchnius, came down into this world. Vel Moshe Ama Alei El Elokim. And Moshe, after Matan Torah, went up to Elokim Moshe, who represented a human being, who was a Gashmistic person, as an emissary of Klal Yisrael, went up to Shamayim to receive the remainder of the Torah. What does this show? The mixture of Shamayim and Aretz, of Gashmis and Ruchnius. All of this was accomplished by Matan Torah. Prior to Matan Torah, there was no such thing that if something which a mitzvah is done with, that this item should carry Kedusha. This only happened after Matan Torah. And with this, Chassidus explains what we find by Avraham Avinu. By Avraham Avinu, when he decided to delegate his son Eliezer, he should go find the shidduch. I'm sorry, to his servant. Thank you, servant Eliezer, to go ahead and find the shidduch for his son Yitzchak. What does the pasuk tell us? That he told him, "Simno yotcha tachas yereich," that he should put his hand and touch his milah. Something which is, according to the concept of tznius, it requires an interpretation. We have to have a reason for it. Avraham Avinu should do such a thing. In fact, there's an interesting Gemara. Rabbeinu HaKodesh, Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, said that he never put his hand below his stomach. And here Avraham Avinu suggests to Eliezer that when will he put him under oath, as the pasuk says, Simna yotcha tachas yerevi. So Chassidus explains. We know that the others did all of the mitzvahs even before they were commanded. Gemara tells us, however, we also know, the reward for the one who does a mitzvah and he's commanded to do the mitzvah is greater than for the one who isn't commanded. Reason is simple, because the one who is commanded has a Yetzer Hara that is interfering with him. And nonetheless, he's overcoming the Yetzer Hara and fulfilling the mitzvah, so his schar is greater than the one who's not commanded, who's not a mitzvah v'oisa. So Chassidus explains, Avraham Avinu was not a mitzvah v'oisa. He was not commanded to do the mitzvahs. He voluntarily fulfilled all the mitzvahs. However, Avraham wanted that at least one mitzvah he should have similar to the way Yidden will be fulfilling mitzvahs later after Matan Torah. In other words, he wanted to be a mitzvah v'oisa and one mitzvah. And with this, Chassidus also answers the question of why, if Avraham fulfilled all the mitzvahs, why did he wait for the mitzvah of Milah? Why didn't he do that on his own? However, he wanted to have one mitzvah where he should be a mitzvah v'oisa. Being that on this mitzvah, he was a mitzvah v'oisa. So it's similar. So just like the mitzvahs which the Yidden had after Matan Torah. Where was Avraham able to have a mitzvah where the gashmius of the thing should carry a kedusha, like by us all the gashmius the mitzvahs? By Avraham it was only in mitzvahs milah. And being that when one is put under oath, it is done over an object of mitzvah, Avraham had no other object of mitzvah which carried kedusha within it, other than to what he himself suggested to Eliezer, Simna yotcha tachas yereich. So that is before Matan Torah. However, after Matan Torah, Matan Torah accomplished this outstanding thing that every gashmistic thing which a Yid comes into contact with, he's capable and powerful of instilling kedusha and godliness into that thing. So here the Rebbe says, we're talking about the greatness of Shavuos. And what happens is, usually, what comes every Yontif, we build up that Yontif. Comes Pesach, we build Pesach as if that would be the greatest Yontif. Comes Sukkot, we build Sukkot as if that would be the greatest Yontif. So there are those that sit back and think, what is the real truth? I mean, how can we every time change? Shavuos will explain that Shavuos is so outstanding. Comes Sukkot, we will say how Sukkot is outstanding, and so forth. The Rebbe says maybe there are those that would think that it's Purim Torah, but it says even Purim Torah also is Torah. It's like the world has an expression of Purim Torah, but it also has to have a Yesod in Torah. But the truth is, But what we are discussing is take the way it is al pi Torah, based on what Siddur teaches us, that's brought in the Arizal, that every mitzvah has its shar, its gate, through which it goes up to heaven. And this gate at times could be a certain special day, and so forth, like a special period, whether it is a yontif, or every day in itself. And then we have special days, like days of Yom Tovim, and so forth. In Halacha we find, there's a Gemara. The Gemara tells us, Be'asrei de Rav, Halacha kerav. In Rav's area, where Rav was, we know with the famous Tuam Eroim, there was Rav and Shmuel. So, in Rav's territory, where Rav was Rav, the halacha was accepted like him. In other words, the people in his community followed his psak. Ba'asrei de Shmuel, in Shmuel's community, the people followed halacha kishmuel. So again we see that in Rav's area, their channel, their shah, the gate for their mitzvahs to go through heaven would be when they would listen to Rav. And in Shmuel's area, it would be when they would listen to Shmuel. To such an extent that we find take by every single person his Zohir Beit Tvei. There's a discussion in Gemara that one Amoira asked by the other, Ovuch, your father, b'mai have Zohir Tvei, in which mitzvah did he really excel? So Chassidus brings out, based on this question, especially the Hasidische Taich, that Zohir doesn't only mean excel, but Zohir means, we discussed in previous Farbrengen, Zohir means shine, a spiritual illumination. We find by every Yid that he has a special mitzvah which he really enjoys. And every individual has his mitzvah where he has his koch in, which he really puts himself into. Even though we are obligated to fulfill all the mitzvahs, and none of us could go out and differentiate what is a more important mitzvah and what is a less important mitzvah, chas v'shalom. We are not allowed to say what is a kala shebekala and what is chamura shebechamura, as Chazal say, what is considered an easier mitzvah or a harder mitzvah. But nonetheless, we see so by nature of people that everyone has a certain mitzvah which he has a soft spot within himself to that mitzvah. What does this mean? This means, the Rebbe teaches, that all of his mitzvahs and all of his avodas Hashem is going up to Shemayim via this mitzvah which he has a specialty in, which he has a special enjoyment in. And through this mitzvah which he's really excelling in, all the rest of his avodas Hashem is going up to Shemayim. And with this we can go a step further. We say in davening, "V'sein chalkeinu b'seirasecha." Give us our chelik in your Torah, our share in your Torah, which means that every one of us has a part in Torah. And all of this was given to Moshe Sinai. When Moshe received Torah from Sinai, he received all of Torah shebiksav, the written Torah and the oral Torah, and as the famous expression, "Afilu mashe talmid vasik osid lachadesh," even what will be revealed in Torah in later generations, all of it already was given to Moshe. Even every Yid who has his chelik in Torah, what he will introduce in Torah, all of this was given to Moshe. Rabbi asks, we find people that are not at a level of introducing inyanim in Torah, to such an extent, as the expression in Gemara is, Lo yoda mai ka'ama. He doesn't know what he's saying. When he's learning Torah, he doesn't understand the Torah. So how can we say that this type of a person is going to introduce an inyan in Torah? He will be machadish an inyan in Torah. So the Rebbe says that doesn't necessarily mean introducing inyanim in Torah. There are times we find many very simple people, anoshim pshutim, and at the same time they have their special ways of dedications to specific mitzvahs and to a specific inyan and mindset and inyan and act and deed which they remember it. Could be they remember it from their malamed mecheda, they remember it from their fathers and from their grandfathers, and this at times could be very, very meaningful to pick up from these simple Jews their specialty in Avodas Hashem. We should learn from them and see what we can copy from them and what we can learn from them in their way, how they are excelling in Avodas Hashem. And all of this is brought out because all of this is the part of the message of Shavuos. I've also mentioned, he mentioned that Shavuos, he spoke about it at length, that Shavuos we also have two more inyanim. Shavuos is the day of David HaMelech. David HaMelech passed away on Shavuos. And David HaMelech, he's Ne'im Zemiros Yisrael. He's the one that was the author of the Tillim, which Yidden constantly say, and Yidden throughout generations keep on saying Tillim with much kavanah and so forth. It was in the Farbrengen of Shavuos, when the Rebbe was also talking about David HaMelech. And the Rebbe, and the importance of saying Tillim, how we see Yidden throughout all generations have always been attached to the Tillim. But at the same time, the Rebbe says, even though in the Yiratzin we say that our saying of Tillim should be credited just like the saying of David HaMelech, but nonetheless, the way we see people today say Tillim, people say Tillim very fast. Tillim is said in a very fast way. We don't usually sit down and say Tillim slowly. So the Rebbe mentioned that when he was a child in Cheder, there were children from various areas. And there were children from Poland, and there were children from Lita. And the children got into a conversation on the various methods of saying Tillim. So the Polish children said, the children who came from Poland, that by them it's acceptable to say Tillim in a very fast way. Why? So the child explained very simple. Being that Tillim is very dear, very precious, he says when you have something sweet to eat, when you have a candy or some other sweets, you finish it very fast because you want to enjoy it right away. You don't postpone it, you don't take your time on it, you just grab it, and that's it. So then the children continue their conversation. If so, why their Rebbe, their Malamed, when he says Tillim not fast, he says Tillim with a lot of kavanah. So the children amongst themselves came to a realization, to the Malamed, to the Rebbe, the Tehillim is like something very hot. And something that's very hot, we can't swallow fast. Something that's very hot, we could digest only very slow. But nonetheless, Shavuos is the day of David HaMelech. And Shavuos is also the day of the Baal Shem Tov. And the Baal Shem Tov, the Rebbe continues, also has a shaykhus to each and every Yid, just like David HaMelech did. The Baal Shem Tov, by name, was called Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. So we know the famous interpretation that the Baal Shem Tov came down to this world at a time when the entire Jewish community was at a level, they were all in a spiritual faint, and they needed somebody to wake them up. Just like when somebody faints, we see that when we call him by his name, this helps that he should wake up. The same thing, Klal Yisrael was sent, someone was sent, Baal Shem Tov, who was named Yisrael, which is the general title of Klal Yisrael, to wake up all of Klal Yisrael. And furthermore, he has a shaykhus to each and every Yid. Because we all know the famous Gemara, Yisrael, Afal Pishachata, Yisrael, that a Jew, even though he sinned, he's still a Jew. So the Baal Shem Tov also has a shaykhus to all the Yidden. And this is the day of Shavuos. Has all of these inyanim within it. And now we have the Shabbos. That the Shabbos, we concluded again, elevates these outstanding days of Shavuos. So we can imagine what type of a precious and dear Shabbos this Shabbos is, the Shabbos that comes after Shavuos. As it's customary in the Farbrengen that the Rebbe explains in Inyan in Rashi and Chumash Rashi of the weekly Sedre, and also in Inyan in the Rambam and the Pirkei Avos. Firstly, the Rebbe discussed, in today's Sedra we find how all of the Shvatim, everybody volunteered, and they came and they brought a kol. And the Torah tells us specifically, repeats, every single tribe, beginning from the Yom HaRishon, was the first one, was Nachshon, the Nasi of the tribe of Yehuda, and straight through for 12 consecutive days, every nasi of a shevet brought a korban. However, there's nothing mentioned regarding the shevet Levi. Why didn't shevet Levi bring a korban? We learned already in Pashas Bamidbar and in Pashas Naso how dear shevet Levi was to the Eibishter, and what kind of a special attention shevet Levi got from the Eibishter. Here, when it comes to such a moment, when the Mishkan was built, and all the Shvatim are expressing their joy and excitement by bringing the Korbanos, where is shevet Levi's korban? And if shevet Levi wasn't told to be a korban, bring a korban, why are they so quiet about it? What do we find? At the beginning of the following Seder, in the beginning of the Seder of Ba'aloischa, Ba'aloischa Saneiros, there we find that the message of Hashem to Aaron was that he should go ahead and put on the menorah, light the candles. But there Rashi tells us, Chol Shadaita Shel Aaron, that Aaron kind of felt weak, was disappointed why he didn't participate in the korbanos which the rest of the Nesiim brought. So the Rebbe is asking, is it only Chol Shadaita? It's a weakness of something, weak feeling by Aaron? Aaron and the entire tribe should have turned over the entire world. Why is it that every Shevet is bringing a korban and they are not bringing a korban? So if we do find in Rashi some interpretation on it, Rashi puts it very mild. You know what it was? Chol Shadaita Shel Aaron. Aaron felt bad. He felt kind of a bit disturbed why he too didn't bring a korban. Should have been much more than that. Such a tremendous excitement in front of Klal Yisrael. They see all tribes are bringing korbanos, and Aaron doesn't say anything, and he's not complaining, and his tribe is, all the members of his tribe are not complaining. Nobody is saying anything. The only thing, after it all finished and he was appointed to light the menorah, that is when Rashi mentioned, you know, Rashi, you should know that Aaron had some sort of a chalishus hadas, felt bad. Should have been much more than that. So, Rebbe is explaining, Shevet Levi was extremely close to the Eibishter, to the extent that they were the emissaries of the Eibishter to be in charge of his Mishkan. As we find various expressions in the Psukim, in this week's Seder, and last week's Seder, and in general in the Torah, that tell us how close Shevet Levi was to the Eibishter. For Shevet Levi to go ahead and bring a korban, which means they are participating in the joy of the erection of the Mishkan, that couldn't be. Just like a person doesn't buy, a king wouldn't go out and buy a gift for himself. A person wouldn't buy a gift for himself either. Levi was so intimately close to the Eibishter that there's no room for them to bring a korban for the erection of the Mishkan, because they are part of the Eibishter. Nesunim Heimali, they are given to the Eibishter. They are the chosen ones from the Eibishter to serve in the Mishkan and to do all the Avodos in the Mishkan, the Koyanim and the Leviim. There is no room to say that they are going to bring a korban. It's like they are strangers bringing a korban in the Mishkan and them, we cannot differentiate between it. And here the Rebbe wants to give it a little better understanding to us. So he brings an example that a chassan on his wedding, chassan on his chasana, is usually not the one that gets the crowd happy. It's the mechutanim, his parents, her parents, and the close friends and the family around. They are the ones that are bringing the simcha into the chasana, into the wedding. The Rebbe says that at his own wedding, the Frierdiker Rebbe took a bottle of mashke and some cups and went around to the audience, to the participants, to the guests, to give everyone to say l'chaim. The Rebbe says that he wanted to go along with him. He wanted to get up and go along. So the Frierdiker Rebbe told them that he should remain seated. The Rebbe says, but you all know that I am in action. So I wanted to go again. Stubborn. So, but the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't let him. The Rebbe continued to give out the mashke, but he didn't want the Rebbe should go with him. The Rebbe should remain on his seat. The Rebbe said he had no alternative. He remained sitting on a seat. He says he was sitting on pins, sitting on spilkes, but he had no alternative. But what do we derive from all of this? The is not supposed to be the one that should go around amongst the guests, greeting the guests, to instill simcha, to instill joy into the affair. This is something which is done by the close people around him, the family, the immediate family, the guests, and so forth. Rebbe continues, but the 5-year-old who's learning Chumash and wants to understand this pasuk wasn't at my wedding, wasn't at my chasana. So how are we going to explain it to him? The Rebbe says the child could also understand it. A boy who learns Chumash had his upsherenish when his hair was cut when he was 3 years old. So the child remembers that who was heavily involved in all the preparations? It wasn't him. It was his parents, his Rebbe, if he had a Melamed at that age, and all the other members of the family. He himself comes as the guest of the night, of the affair. He is not the one that's involved in preparations or doing things to arouse simcha and so forth within the Upsheranish. The same the Rebbe says is Shevet Levi. Shevet Levi was that close to the Eibishter that there's no room to say that Shevet Levi is going to bring a korban which is going to express the simcha for the dedication of the Mishkan. After this interpretation, now let us understand why does Rashi say Chol Shaddai Tishalang, that Aaron felt bad? That Aaron shouldn't have felt bad at all? If everything is so smooth as we just put it, and that is why none of the members of Levi complained, and Aaron initially also didn't complain. Why is it that when we find about the commandment of lighting the candles in the menorah, there we find that Rashi does mention Chol Shaddai Tishalang, that he did have some sort of a weakness, in other words, it aroused within him some sort of a dissatisfaction. He wasn't happy with the fact that he didn't participate. So here the Rebbe is learning that the Chlishas Hadas of Aaron was for a completely different reason. Being that we learned here that on the 8th day, Shmini L'Miluyim, Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron went into the Oyel Moed, and Moshe exclaimed, V'hinoyam Hashem, V'hinoyam, and he said, may it be the will that the Shechina will dwell in whatever you do. In other words, it was all expression of satisfaction from Moshe around all the excitement which went on when the Mishkan was erected. However, what do we find after that? That the Rebishter is talking to whom in the Oyel Moed? Only to Moshe, not to Aaron. So the Rebbe is learning that the Chalishas Hadas of Aaron is because he realized that he too was together with Moshe Rabbeinu at the Shmini L'Miluyim, at the 8th day, and for the remainder of days, whenever Hashem spoke to Moshe, Hashem spoke to Moshe only in Atar. This created a Chalishas Hadas by Aaron, and as a result of that, when he was told that he's the chosen one to go ahead and light the menorah, by this he came back to himself, he got back to himself, and he had no longer any Chalishas Hadas. Chalishas weakness. Feeling bad, in other words. In general, the Farbrengen today, the Rebbe spoke an inyan which he spoke about in the Shavuosdike Farbrengen, and he started to speak about it in last week's Farbrengen, last Shabbos. Last Shabbos, in the Shiurim of Rambam, it was the halachas of Nazir, which means when a person accepts upon himself to be a Nazir, not to drink wine, not to cut his hair, and so forth, which is discussed in today's Sedra as well, in fact. But the Rebbe brought out something very interesting. We know that every Shabbos we say a haftarah, a maftir. The contents of the maftir is usually the same contents of an inyan which is discussed in the Sedra. Because the whole inyan of saying maftir originated when there was a decree given out on Yidden that they wouldn't be allowed to to read the Torah. So that is when the Chachamim of that generation came up with a thought to read a Perek in Navi, which has a content which would remind us on the Seder. Besides, during the 3 weeks between Shivasa B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, as well as the 7 weeks after that, where there we read a special series of Haftarahs. During the 3 weeks, it's a series that has to do with the 3 weeks, and then we come to Shiva, the Nechemta, 7 weeks of Haftarahs, which express condolence to the Yidden after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. In general, the contents of the Haftarah, which has something very similar to the Seder, is always something of the end of the Seder. Not to the beginning of the Seder, but the end of the Seder. This week's Haftarah is a Haftarah that deals with the inyan of a Nazir, leading to the birth of Shimshon and all that. Why do we say that this week? Because in today's Seder we also read the dinim of a Nazir. It is not at the end of the Seder, it's at the middle of the Seder. And it's not a major inyan in this week's Seder when we look at the entire Seder. And still we see how important it is that when the maftir for this week's Seder was chosen, it was chosen a maftir which also deals with a Nazir. Anyways, in the Farbrengen, like I said last week in Shavuos, Rabbi got into the question if a goy can become a Nazir. The question if a goy can become a Nazir. The halacha is a goy can't. Because the Torah tells us, Daber al b'nei Yisrael, the introduction to this parsha comes, talk to the Yidden, so it's something which relates to Yidden and not to goy. So the Rebbe got into a question, how about the goy becoming a partial Nazir? Being that Naziris also has a component of bringing korbanos, and a goy who decides to bring a korban, his korban is accepted, so why can't he at least bring the korban? And talking about this inyan, the Rebbe also came to a question that there's an inyan of lo yachil devaroi. If a Yid accepts upon himself to bring a korban, the halacha is that he has a certain amount of time to bring the korban. If he does not bring it within this amount of time, there are various opinions in Gemara, whether 3 Yomim Tovim should pass, or 1 Yom Tov should pass, and so forth. He's either on lo yachil devaroi. In other words, he didn't live up to what he promised. Now the question is, if this same lo yachil devaroi applies by a goy. So obviously the Rebbe mentioned in the Farbrengen, perhaps Monday night, that by a goy, there's a question if lo yachil devaroi, if this issa of living up to what he says, fulfilling his commitment, the goy is also obligated to it or not. So it seems like the Rebbe questions were written to the Rebbe that in halach it's not mentioned that a guy should be mechuyev under lo yachil devaroi. Rebbe said Shavuos, and he says it today, true. It's not mentioned in Paiskim that this is also a guy's obligation. But show me, where does it say that a guy, when he says something, he doesn't have to fulfill what he said? In other words, what the Rebbe is trying to prove is that there are certain things, even though they are not mentioned befeirish, but we have to come on to our common sense. True, as far as the Isser of lo yachil devaroi, as far as the lav of lo yachil devaroi, that taka does not apply to the goy. But it doesn't mean that when a goy takes a pledge upon himself, we should say that his commitment is no commitment, and therefore he doesn't have to fulfill his commitment. He definitely does. Any human being that accepts a pledge on himself has to fulfill what he pledged. Regardless if you use the halachic terminology of lo yachil devaroi, or you don't apply it from a halachic point of view, you can apply it from a common sense point of view. And talking about this inyan, today again, the Rebbe led into another inyan. The Rebbe spoke recently in Pesach Dike Farbrengens, the question whether chinuch, the obligation of educating children, that the father and mother have the chiyuv of being mechanech their children, if this is min ha-Torah or this is min ha-Rabban. And the Alter Rebbe writes in Shulchan Aruch that this obligation is min ha-Rabbanan, it is not an obligation min ha-Torah. So Rebbe asks, if so, the question arises, what was done by people in previous generations? Rabbi mentioned the Shvatim. The Shvatim look after their children for giving them a chinuch. How about people like Amram? Or in later generations, the Tanoim, and the Amoraim, and the Rabbanon Sfuroi, and all these generations. If we say that the obligation from a halachic point of view came later, how was it in generations prior to that as far as the obligation of giving a chinuch to their children? The Rebbe says, anybody who only has a straight mind will agree with you and that they definitely looked after their children. There is no room in anybody's mind to say that anybody responsible has children and is not looking after his children to see to it that his children receive a proper chinuch. It's not let us not get into the question whether chinuch is min ha-Torah or chinuch is min ha-Rabbanon. There's something which our common sense tells us, and anybody who only has a straight mind, anybody who's only a normal person, will understand and realize that it's the obligation of a father to educate his children. And the Rebbe also brought in the Gemara. The Gemara tells us that a father is only supposed, there's a Gemara, that parents are only obligated to provide their children with their needs until age 6 or 7. And afterwards, if he does provide them with all his needs, it is considered a charity. It's a Gemara. The Rebbe says, so show me any parent who's going to say after his child is 6 or 7 years old that he's no longer going to support him. In fact, in Halacha, it's mentioned that how we're supposed to enjoy Yontef. So it's also mentioned that we're supposed to buy new clothes for the children. So the Rebbe says, so somebody may think back and say, for Yontef, we're supposed to buy them new clothes. However, for all year, we're not obligated to clothe them. Is this going to make any sense? Definitely not. There are certain things which are our own common sense, whether there is a halachic responsibility for it, whether it's midaraisa, whether it's midarabbanan, it's irrelevant. The fact is, common sense tells us that we have to do it. And here the Rebbe goes a step further. That in the Hayom Yom, by the Rebbe soll gesund sein, he quotes the Frierdiker Rebbe, quoting his father, the Rebbe Rashab. Where the Rebbe Rashab says that just like a person is obligated to put on tefillin every day, the same one has an obligation to spend a half an hour a day about the education of his children. It's the obligation of a father to sit back and dedicate a half an hour a day to the chinuch of his children. Rebbe says he published it in the Hayom Yom many years ago, and nobody ever really asked the question, what's going on here? How is the Rebbe Rashab comparing the putting on of tefillin to the obligation that a father has to educate his children? Putting on tefillin is something which huksha kol ha-Torah kol ha-tefillin. The entire Torah is compared to tefillin, which means tefillin is a biblical obligation. It's a mitzvah midaraisa that every Yid is mechuyev to put on tefillin every weekday. As far as chinuch of children, it's not a chiyuv min ha-Torah, it's only a chiyuv min ha-Rabbanan, as we just discussed. So how is it that the Rebbe Rashab compares and says just like we are obligated to put on tefillin daily, the same way it is a chayiv, it is a responsibility on parents to dedicate at least a half an hour a day to the education of their children. Rebbe says, look at how the Rebbe Rashab expresses himself. Expressed himself regarding the importance of dedicating time to everyone to their children's education. He says it's a chayiv, it's an obligation. He doesn't use the term it's a mitzvah, because it's the fact of a mitzvah, whether it's a mitzvah deraisa, it's a mitzvah derabanan, this is irrelevant. It is an obligation. Anyone understands that this is the moral obligation of a father, that he has to dedicate a half an hour a day, at least half an hour a day, to the chinuch of his children. And here the Rebbe brought an interesting comparison. In Gemara we find there's a concept of a misha pora. What means misha pora? If a person doesn't live up to his word, doesn't keep up his commitment, Gemara tells us he's worthy of a misha pora. Misha pora means misha pora, whoever got even with the Daya HaMabul, the generation of the Mabul, should also get even with this person. In other words, al pi halacha, the Bezdin can't do him anything, can't harm him in any way. can't obligate him in any way. However, he's worthy of this type of a compliment, this type of a mishapara, that whoever got even with the generation of the Mabul should get even with him as well. What do we see? That Chazal say that he's equivalent to the Deir HaMabul. In other words, a person that doesn't keep up to his word, he's destroying the world. He made a commitment and he's not living up to it. He's destroying the world. Just like the Deir HaMabul. Thank you. Just like the generation of the flood. The same, the one who says, makes commitments and doesn't live up to what he says. So, Bezdin, the Jewish court, Taka can't do anything to him. But the seriousness, the consequences of such type of an attitude is spelled out by the Chachamim very, very clear. The same thing when we're talking about the obligation of a person to dedicate at least a half an hour a day to the education of his children. It's a chayiv, it's his obligation, it is there. And regardless of whether it is considered a mitzvah d'oraisa, it's considered a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, all of this is irrelevant. It is his obligation, it is his chayiv. And otherwise, it's like the world will be, just like we say, that the person who doesn't live up to his commitment is compared to the generation of the flood. It's the same idea here. If he doesn't give his children a proper chinuch, a proper education, it could lead to who knows what. So the Rebbe Rashab uses the expression, it's a chayiv, it's an obligation. Now the Rebbe continues, to us, Chassidim. First of all, a Rebbe is a Paisek Hadoyer. When the Rebbe paskens something, as far as we are concerned, we have to do whatever the Rebbe paskens. And secondly, a Rebbe is also considered a father to his children, to his students and to his children. Because students are considered children. The Rebbe said, too, as far as we are concerned, we are disciples of the Rebbe Rashab, because we all learned in his institutions and are following his paths and his ways. Here the Rebbe also brought to our attention, there's an expression regarding Rabbeim, Hoilchim be'choisav, we are going in his paths. So what do we mean by going in his path? It's not an Indian, this is a mitzvah, or this is a mitzvah d'oraisa, or it's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. This is a path which he has arranged for us. And this is what he has told us to do. And explain to us the importance of being dedicated to the chinuch, to the education of our children. And this is not something which was left, as the expression goes, as a minhag beis harav, which is a minhag which is only applicable for the Rebbe, or for the Rebbe and his family and so forth. Excuse me. This is something which the Rebbe has paskened and demanded from all of us, that all of us should follow this instruction, that just like we are obligated daily to put on film, the very same way we are obligated to set aside at least a half an hour a day for the education of our children. Interesting, talking about this inyan, the flow of talking, the Rebbe also mentioned that for those who have already raised their children and don't have this, they were mechanech the children, and the children are adults, they too could be active in this inyan, in the method of Avos Yisrael, by helping a friend of theirs who is still raising his children, who still has youngsters at home and is raising them, by helping a friend, giving him a hand in raising his children. Talking about the whole inyan of Nazir, and a Nazir is one who doesn't drink wine. And it's customary in the Farbrengens that people give in mashke to the Rebbe for specific occasions, whether it's a special type of a siyum, or it's a dedication of a new Chabad house, or a fundraising function for a Chabad house, and so forth. And the Rebbe said that this mashke has a mixture of wine, and it also, the Rebbe adds in a drop of wine in it usually. So this is an Indian. Here we're talking about a Nazir, and here we're talking about the Indian of drinking wine, on the contrary, which is contrary to the Indian of Naziris. First of all, the Rebbe says we're in Shabbos. On Shabbos, we make Kiddush, and we all know that Kiddush on Shabbos is on wine. Kacheu alayai. The same thing when it comes to Havdalah. The Rebbe added on that Havdalah is not something which is like done after Shabbos, though in time, clockwise, we do it after Shabbos, but this is part of the celebration of Shabbos. We celebrate Shabbos in such a way that when it enters and when it leaves, we express it over a kos of yain. And even the Rebbe says those in halacha where there's room to say that mustn't necessarily be over wine, but it could be about anything which is considered in halacha, as the term is chamar medina, something which is choshev and as honorable as wine, as precious as wine. So also the expression goes chamar medina. Chamar in Aramaic means wine. Chamra means wine. So again we see that wine, on the other hand, does have its special significance. Especially when we're talking about wine which is given out, which is going to mashkin, or wine which is given out for Chassidische Farbrengen. Chassidische Farbrengen has within it the concept of Gdoila Legima Shemekareves. There's a Gemara that when people sit together and have a drink together, this creates a closeness amongst them. And what is the whole union of creating a closeness amongst people? This is the union of Avas Yisrael. Avas Yisrael and Achdus Yisrael. So all of this really ultimately brings to a unity amongst Yidden. And this is something which is very important when we're talking about Matan Torah. Because Matan Torah, the only way we were worthy of getting the Torah was when the Yidden rested at Har Sinai on Rosh Chodesh, before they got to Torah, they had to be in a position of Vayichan Sham Yisrael, Vayichan in a singular, meaning that they were all totally united, Ki Ish Echad B'Leiv Echad. Rebbe spoke also an Indian regarding Pirkei Avos. Pirkei Avos, we know, we say during the weeks of Pesach and Shavuos. It's accepted by everyone to recite Perek on Shabbos after Mincha. One of the reasons for it is brought in Sfarim, that being that between Pesach and Shavuos we are preparing for Matan Torah, and we know that Derech Eretz Kodma LeTorah, Derech Eretz manners comes before Torah, and Pirkei Avos contains rules of manners. So that is why, in order we should be properly prepared to receive the Torah, we go through Pirkei Avos before Shavuos. Now the Alter Rebbe in his Siddur is something which was written for everybody. Siddur is Davar HaShaveh L'chol Nefesh. It's equal to everybody. Everybody davens in the Siddur. How great one is, or how small one is, everybody uses a Siddur. So when it comes to Pirkei Avos, so first of all the Alter Rebbe put in Pirkei Avos into the Siddur. He doesn't just tell us, goes find the Mishnayos and say Perek out of the Mishnayos. He put it into the Siddur. And also before the Pirkei Avos, and also before the Pirkei Avos tells us that we recite Perek between Pesach and Shavuos. V'yesh noyagin, there are those that also have a custom to recite Pirkei Avos Kol Chodshei HaKayitz, all the summer months. Shabbos HaKayitz. Rebbe says regarding what the previous Rabbeim did, we find something interesting. We find that there are Mamorim from the Rabbeim that begin with a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos on Shabbosim after Shavuos, which is the Perek of that particular Shabbos. We know that a beginning of a Maimer is usually with a pasuk of that Sedra, or something that has a shaykhus to that Shabbos. If we find the beginning of a Maimer with a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, and it's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos on a Shabbos after Shavuos, so this is an indication that on that Shabbos they also recited Pirkei Avos. We explain, brought to our attention, that for those that say Pirkei Avos, the Shabbosim after Shavuos as well, there's a siman brought in Svarim, Nefesh. What does Nefesh mean? Nosoi, Parshas Nosoi, Parshas Pinchas, and Parshas Shoftim. Which means we began saying Pirkei Avos in Parshas Nosoi. We will begin again, the second cycle will be in Parshas Pinchas, and the third cycle we will begin in Parshas Shoftim. And in deeper explanation, it means that the whole union of Pirkei Avos is something which helps the nefesh, it helps the soul. The Rebbe explains that as far as reciting Pirkei Avos before Shavuos, this is something which everybody has to come out to. However, after Shavuos, we've already received the Torah. We're already on a higher madrege. After Shavuos, there are already differences. Yeshnei again. There are some that do and some that don't. So the Rebbe is learning that in Pirkei Avos itself, there is how Pirkei Avos relates before Matan Torah, and there's the lessons in Pirkei Avos after Matan Torah. The Rebbe learned today one Mishnah. There's a Mishnah in the first Perek where the Mishnah tells us Hevei misunim badin Hamidu talmidem harbei v'asu syog latoira.
That's the first Mishnah.
Havu misunim badin v'hamidu talmidem harbe v'asu syog latoira. Be deliberate in judgment, raise up many disciples, and make a fence around the Torah. So the Rebbe is learning Havu misunim badin, simply. What does it mean? Two people come to it in Torah, and the people are pretty angry one on another, and then both of them begin shouting. So it's the obligation of the dayan, of the Beis Din, who's sitting there to calm them, and also that when they themselves give out the psak din, they should give it in a very calm way so that they will not come to any error. However, there is the inyan of Havei Misunim Bedin as far as a higher madrege, and this is Havei Misunim Bedin like after Matan Torah. And this could be in the learning of Torah itself. In the learning of Torah, the Rebbe says, there are people that can learn Torah, and he gets totally carried away in the learning of Torah, to the extent of a reise komerascha, meaning that the Torah is koching within him, the Torah is boiling within him, that he's totally getting out of his boundaries, out of his limitations, and he's totally losing himself. So we are told, no, have a misunim badin. When you learn Torah, stay calm, halt kop, keep track of what you're doing, keep track of what you're saying. Have a misunim badin. Then we come to the next inyan. The next inyan is hemidu talmidem harbe. Put up many disciples. What is the Mishnah introducing by this? Very simple. We're telling a person, don't sit back in your own room, but you should know it is your obligation to bring out to create many disciples. The person may be afraid. He'll get involved with many people. It may affect him. The Mishnah says no. Hemidu talmidem harbe. This is as far as affecting him, as far as on his level of serving the Rebbeinu and so forth. But it could be a step further. A person will say, as long as I'm learning with a small group of students, I can dwell into learning and accomplish big accomplishments in learning and achieve a lot. However, if I'm going to become a master yeshiva, in other words, if I'm going to start teaching many, many students, it'll distract me from my own learning. So the Mishnah tells us no. Hamidu talmidem harbe. It is your obligation to see to it to bring up many, many disciples, and anybody that you could bring closer to learn Torah. You should know you're obligated to do so. Then the Mishnah goes a step further. Asus yog Torah. That the Chachamim have also realized that there is a need in putting boundaries around Torah, just like a gate is put around a house to protect the house. The same thing, there's the spiritual house, there's the house of Torah, and at times there is a need to put certain gates around it, a certain protection around it, in order that the Torah should not be affected, that Torah should not be damaged. So by putting this yog, we protect the Torah. Which in the simple meaning in the Mishnah, it means that by the Chachamim adding on certain gzeiras and harchokos, in other words, by doing this led to it that preventions. In a preventive way, introducing certain things. So if they put preventive boundaries, preventive gates, so this would protect from affecting the Torah itself, that a Yid will not come to transgress and be over on an Issa or be over on an Aveil. Rebbe also continued in the Farbrengen, being that we are leaving Shavuos, we're going away from Shavuos. What should we take along with us from Shavuos? How we have to excel in all three categories. In Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chassadim. The fact that we have to excel in Torah is very obvious. This is what Shavuos is giving us. Shavuos is giving us a demand to increase our learning. As much as we learn, we have to learn more. And also in Avodah, this is what the Mishnah really tells us also. We read about in today's Mishnah that these are the three pillars of the world. And also Gemilas Chesed. Regarding Gemilas Chesed, which is Gemilas Chesed and Tzedakah, we find in the Torah by Shavuos, the Torah uses the expression that you should give Misas Nidvas Yotcha. This is an expression which we find only by Shavuos. On the importance of giving the open your hand, Misas Nidvas Yotcha. And this is what we take along with us from Shavuos on the importance of tzedakah. And this, the Rebbe says, this is in the same spirit we have to educate children as well. That they should realize the importance of all of these three things. And it should be in a way that when a Yid sees a pushke, without anybody reminding him and without anybody saying anything, the mere fact that he sees the pushke there, the pushke should stand as a reminder that he has to put his hand into his pocket and give tzedakah. Nobody has to be there telling him anything or telling him on the importance of tzedakah or demanding from him. The pushka itself should be there as a reminder on the importance of giving tzedakah. As well as by a child, the Rebbe continued. We see that when a child sees something that has a hole in it, it's the nature of the child that the child will want to throw something in to see that he or she could get it into the hole. And this is the whole union of a pushke. So the Rebbe spoke about the idea of making a pushke dear to a child, that children as well should have the enjoyment of wanting to give tzedakah. The Rebbe concluded the Farbrengen that in this week's Chazarah we find, after the parsha of Naziris, Torah talks about a Nazir. The Torah concludes with Yivrechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, Yoyer Hashem panav elecha v'choneka, Yisa Hashem panav elecha v'yosem lecha shalom, which these are tremendous amount of brachas which the Rebbe is giving Yidden. That the Rebbe will guard us, and the Rebbe will give us riches, wealth, spiritual wealth, as well as physical wealth, gashmiistika wealth, material wealth. And together with it, the Rebbe will guard the wealth. Not only will he give us the wealth, but the riches, but he will make sure that it remains with us, and we will not lose it in any way, chas v'shalom. So let it be so, that the Rebbe should give Yidden, that Yidden should have whatever they need, and it should not be in a format of tzedakah that the Rebbe is giving Yidden, but it should be in a way, by tzedakah. There's a mitzvah when we give somebody tzedakah, we have to see that he has he has whatever he needs. But on the other hand, by charity, the concept is we're not obligated to make him rich. On the other hand, when the Rebbe is giving us, it shouldn't be in a format of tzedakah, but the Rebbe should give it in a way of Yivrecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, Yoyer Hashem panav elecha v'choneka, Yisa Hashem panav elecha v'yosem lecha shalom, which all of this is tremendous brachas from the Rebbe. It's tremendous an abundance of wealth which will be coming from the Rabbeinu Shalom. Interesting, in the Maimah which the Rebbe said today, it was also on these psukim of Yivrecha Hashem v'yishmerecha. There the Rebbe explained that really who is the one that is giving the bracha? The brachas come from the Rebbe. But the Rebbe wants to give his brachas through the Koyanim. Because Koyanim are zrizim, Koyanim are fast, and therefore the brachas which are given through the Koyanim will also come in a hasty way, in a fashion, in a manner of haste. And it will reach Klal Yisrael, reach everyone. The Gemara tells us regarding Birchas Koyanim that everybody is included. Afilu, the Gemara uses the expression, Am shebesodos. Even those people who are in the field, they are not attending shul, they are also included in the bracha of Kohen. The Rebbe teaches today in the Maimah, what means Am shebesodos? Sode, in the field, Esav ish sode. Esav was a man of the field. Meaning somebody who's all the way far out, he can be compared to an Esav. What is Am? Am simply means nation, people. However, Chassidus, it's broad at length. What is the taich of Am? Am means a coal which can be lit, but a not lit coal It's called Am. A faleshener koil, gacholem oimemois, the expression is in Chassidus. What does this mean? We're talking about a person who we do not see the light of his neshama. We do not see how his attachment to the Rebishter should be obvious. It's like a coal that has no fire in it. So we are told that the Birchas Hashem, which is a bracha from the Rebishter, reaches to each and every Jew, even the one who is in the level of Gachol Emoimois, Am Shebesada. He's in the level of an Am, and he's Besada. He's all the way out in the field. He's compared to an Esavish Sada. So we are told that the Birchas Hashem reaches even him. The Rebbe also brought in here into the Maimah that there's a Medrash. The Medrash tells us that there are three types of expressions which how the Rebishter refers to Yidden. He refers to Yidden as a sister, as a daughter, and as a mother. So there are three levels of association between the Rebishter and the Yidden. Corresponding to these three levels are also these three psukim in Birchas Koyanim. The Barach of the Rebishter is broken up into three psukim, Yevarechecha, Yoir, Yisa, which also corresponds to these three levels of association between the Rebishter and Klal Yisrael.